A billionaire stood in the rain, watching the waitress who had just offended him wipe tears from her face. She had no idea that the homeless man she'd been feeding for a week was the same man whose signature nearly destroyed her life. No idea that every coffee she poured, every kind word she spoke, was being watched. No idea that in 48 hours, black SUVs would pull up to her workplace, and everything would change forever. But here's what haunts him most. The moment she learns the truth, she'll have a choice to make. Forgive the man who almost took everything from her, or walk away from the only person who ever saw her worth. This is a story about what happens when the richest man in the room realizes he's the poorest person there. Stay with me, because what happens next will change how you see wealth, power, and what it truly means to be human. Let's begin. Welcome to Radiant Story and Tales. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you are watching from. Let me tell you about a man named David Sterling. David had more money than most people could count in a lifetime. His tech company, Sterling Solutions, was one of the biggest in America. He lived in a mansion with 12 bedrooms. He flew in private jets. He wore watches that cost more than cars. When he walked into a room, people stopped talking and started listening. But here's the thing about success. Sometimes when you climb too high, you forget what the ground feels like. You forget what it's like to worry about rent, to count change for a meal, to feel invisible. David had forgotten all of that. One Tuesday morning, his business partner, Robert Hayes, confronted him during a meeting. They'd been friends since college, back when they were both broke students with big dreams. But lately, Robert had been watching David change, watching him make decisions that hurt people without even noticing. "You've lost touch," Robert said, his voice quiet but firm. "You make choices that destroy lives, and you don't even see the faces behind the numbers anymore." David's jaw tightened. "I built this company from nothing. I know exactly what struggle looks like." "Do you?" Robert leaned forward. "Then prove it. Live like an ordinary American for 1 week. No mansion, no driver, no credit cards. Just $500, a cheap motel room, and a basic phone. If you can do that, I'll never question your judgment again." Pride made David accept. He thought it would be easy. He thought he understood the world outside his glass tower. He was wrong about everything. 3 days later, David found himself standing on a street corner in downtown Portland, wearing thrift store clothes and carrying everything he owned in a backpack. His assistant, Thomas, had dropped him off before dawn with $500 bills and strict instructions not to contact anyone from his old life. The first day nearly broke him. The summer heat was suffocating. His cheap shoes gave him blisters. He walked everywhere because bus fare added up faster than he'd imagined. He ate dollar menu items and felt hungry an hour later. He tried to sleep in a $40 night motel where the air conditioning barely worked and sirens screamed all night. By day 3, his money was running out. His phone was dying. His body ached. And for the first time in 20 years, David understood what it felt like to be invisible. People looked right through him. Nobody held doors. Nobody smiled. He was just another face in the crowd, and the world didn't care. That's when he found Rose's Diner. It was a small place tucked between a laundromat and a hardware store. The kind of place where construction workers ate breakfast and nurses grabbed coffee after night shifts. The sign was faded. The booths were cracked. But the smell of fresh coffee and bacon drew him inside. He sat at a corner booth, counting his remaining money. $18 left. 3 more days to go. A young man at the counter laughed loudly. "Hey, look at this guy. Bet he's going to order water and sit here all day." His friend snickered. They always do. Taking up space, making the place look bad. The mockery spread like ripples in water. A few people glanced over, then looked away. Some whispered. Others shook their heads. David felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Shame. Not because of what they said, but because he realized he'd probably thought the same things about people like this. People who looked tired. People who looked forgotten. Then she appeared. Her name was Grace Miller, though David didn't know that yet. She was 24 years old with kind eyes and a waitress uniform that had seen better days. She moved through the diner like someone who'd learned to carry the weight of the world without letting it show. She stopped beside his booth and turned to the man at the counter. "Excuse me," she said firmly, "but everyone here is a customer. Everyone deserves respect." The young man rolled his eyes. "Grace, come on. We're just joking." "Well, the joke's not funny." Her voice was gentle but unmovable. "You want to stay, you treat people right. All people." She turned to David and smiled. Not the plastic smile people use when they're being polite. A real smile, the kind that makes you feel seen. "Sir, what can I get for you today?" David looked up at her, something catching in his throat. "Just coffee and toast, please." "You got it." She wrote it down. "Anything else you need, you just let me know, okay?" He nodded, unable to speak. As she walked away, the diner fell quiet. The men at the counter looked embarrassed. Other customers went back to their meals. And David sat there, stunned, because a waitress named Grace had just given him something he'd forgotten existed. Dignity. What David didn't know, what nobody in that diner knew, was that the homeless-looking man Grace had just offended was worth $3 billion. That his signature could buy that entire block. That he could hire and fire 1,000 people with a phone call. But right now, none of that mattered. Right now, he was just a man who'd been shown kindness when he needed it most. And that simple act was about to change everything. Over the next 3 days, David kept coming back to Rose's diner. At first, it was just because the food was cheap and the coffee was strong. But if he's being honest, and by now, David was learning to be honest with himself, he kept coming back because of Grace. He watched her work. Really watched her. She remembered everyone's order. The construction worker who liked his eggs over easy. The elderly woman who needed decaf. The single dad who always asked for extra napkins for his kids. Grace knew them all, spoke to them all like they mattered. One morning, David overheard her on the phone during her break. "I know, Mom. I know." Her voice was strained. "The doctor said we need to do the treatment twice a week now. I'll find the money somehow. I promise." She hung up and took a deep breath. For just a moment, her shoulders sagged. Then she straightened up, put on her smile, and went back to work like nothing had happened. David felt something twist in his chest. Guilt, maybe, or shame. That evening, Rose, the owner of the diner, a gray-haired woman with laugh lines and tough hands, called Grace over to sit down. "How's your mama doing, honey?" Grace's smile wavered. "She's hanging in there. The hospital bills keep growing, but we're managing." "You work too hard, Grace. 2 jobs, night classes at community college. That's too much." "I'm okay, Miss Rose. Really." But David could hear the exhaustion in her voice. Later, as Grace cleared his table, David spoke quietly. "Your mother, is she sick?" Grace looked surprised that he'd asked. Then she nodded. "Cancer. Stage 3. She's fighting hard, but the treatments..." She trailed off. "I'm taking business classes so I can get a better job, so I can take care of her properly." David stared at this young woman who was working herself to the bone, studying, caring for her sick mother, and still finding the energy to defend strangers in a diner, still choosing kindness when life had given her every reason to be bitter. It shamed him, because David suddenly realized that he'd spent years making decisions that crushed people exactly like Grace. People who worked hard, people who deserved better, people whose lives were just numbers on his quarterly reports. "You're a good daughter," he said softly. Grace smiled. "My mama taught me something before she got sick. She said, 'Grace, the world gonna try to make you hard. Don't let it. Kindness is the only thing they can't take from you.'" David felt those words sink into his bones. The next morning, everything changed. David arrived at the diner to find it packed with people, but nobody was eating. Rose stood at the front, her hands shaking as she held an envelope. "I need to tell you all something," she said, her voice breaking. "The landlords raised the rent by $3,000 a month. And the bank, they're calling it my loan. $50,000 in 30 days, or they're shutting us down." Gasps filled the room. "Shutting down?" Grace whispered. "But why?" Rose's eyes filled with tears. They said some big company wants to build here. They're buying up the whole block. If I can't pay, they're tearing this place down. David felt ice flood his veins. Big company. Raise rent. Loan pressure. Demolition. He knew these details because he'd signed those documents. 3 weeks ago, in his air-conditioned office, he'd approved Sterling Solutions' expansion into downtown Portland. His development team had identified this block. His finance team had pressured the banks. His legal team had drafted the eviction notices. He had done this. The woman who'd shown him kindness, who defended him, who'd reminded him what it meant to be human. He was destroying her world, and she had no idea. David stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loud in the quiet diner. Grace looked at him with concern. "Are you okay?" No, he wasn't okay. Nothing was okay. "I need to make a call," he managed to say, then walked outside into rain that had just started falling. His hands shook as he pulled out his cheap phone and dialed the one number he'd memorized. Thomas, his assistant, answered on the first ring. "Sir, come get me. Now. And bring my phone, my wallet, everything." "Sir, the week isn't." "I don't care. Come now." 20 minutes later, a black town car pulled up 2 blocks away. David climbed in, water dripping onto leather seats. Thomas handed him a towel and his real phone without a word. As they drove from downtown Portland to his mansion in the hills, David stared out the window, watching the city transform from struggle to comfort. From the America most people lived in to the America only a few could afford. The distance wasn't just miles. It was a canyon. By the time he reached home, it was midnight. He didn't sleep. Instead, he sat in his study, surrounded by awards and certificates and photos of himself shaking hands with senators and CEOs, and felt nothing but emptiness. At dawn, he made a call. "Get me every file on the Portland Downtown Development Project. Every document I signed. I want on my desk in 1 hour." When the files arrived, David spread them across his desk. Acquisition reports, financial projections, demolition timelines, legal notices pressuring small businesses. And there, on page after page, was his signature. He'd never even visited the area, never asked who lived there, never wondered what would happen to the people his expansion would erase. To him, it had just been business. Numbers, growth, progress. Now he saw faces. Rose counting her small savings with shaking hands. Grace smiling through exhaustion, choosing kindness when life had given her every reason to be bitter. Real people, real lives. He picked up his phone, canceled the Portland project. All of it, today. And then he started planning how to make things right. The morning sun rose over Portland like it was just another day, unaware that for Rose's diner it might be the last. Grace had barely slept. She'd spent the night at the hospital with her mother, holding her thin hand, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. Her mother had smiled weakly and said, "God will make a way, baby girl. He always does." But walking toward the diner at dawn, Grace wasn't sure anymore. A crowd had already gathered. Neighbors lined the sidewalk, the construction workers who ate breakfast there every morning, the nurses from the night shift, the mechanic from next door, the woman who sold flowers on the corner. This wasn't just about one diner. It was about whether ordinary people mattered at all. Then the convoy arrived. Black SUVs rolled down the street like a funeral procession. Men in dark suits stepped out, carrying briefcases and tablets. Security guards formed a perimeter, and then a man emerged, his smile sharp and cold. His name was Philip Carson, and he worked for Sterling Solutions as what they called a transition specialist. The kind of man hired to do the dirty work that executives didn't want to touch. "Good morning," he announced loudly. "This property is now under corporate acquisition. You have 2 hours to remove your belongings." Rose stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. "We're not leaving." Philip's smile didn't waver. "Then you'll be removed. Your choice." Grace pushed through the crowd. "You can't do this. This place feeds this community. People depend on us. You can't just show up with papers and destroy lives." "Young lady, this is business," Philip said smoothly. "Sentiment doesn't pay bills." progress requires sacrifice. Sacrifice? Grace's voice cracked. You mean destroying people for profit? The crowd murmured angrily. Tension crackled in the air. And then, cutting through everything, came the sound of another vehicle. A single black Mercedes pulled up slowly. The engine quieted. The door opened, and David Sterling stepped out. Except he didn't look like the homeless man anymore. He wore a tailored navy suit, Italian shoes, a watch that caught the sunlight. His face was clean-shaven, his hair styled. He looked like exactly what he was, a man who owned the world. Grace's breath caught in her throat. Her mind struggled to connect the man she'd been serving coffee to with this stranger who looked like he could buy the entire city. Rose gasped. The crowd fell silent. Philip Carson's confident expression dissolved into shock. David walked forward slowly, his eyes scanning the faces, the construction workers, the nurses, the mothers holding their children. Then his gaze found Grace. She was staring at him like she'd seen a ghost. "Good morning," he said quietly, his voice carrying in the stillness. "My name is David Sterling. I'm the owner of Sterling Solutions." The words landed like stones in water. Grace felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "What?" David turned to Philip. "You're fired. Leave. Now." "Sir, I was just following." "I said leave." Philip grabbed his briefcase and practically ran to his SUV. It pulled away, leaving dust behind. David turned to his security team. "Everyone leaves. Clear the area." They obeyed without question. Within minutes, the street was empty except for David and the stunned community staring at him. Rose found her voice first. You're the homeless man, the one who's been coming here." "Yes, ma'am," David said softly. "And I'm sorry for deceiving you." Grace took a step back, her eyes filling with tears. Not tears of relief, tears of betrayal. "You were here the whole time," she said, her voice shaking. "Watching us. While your company—" She couldn't finish. "While you were planning to destroy us." The pain in her voice cut deeper than any accusation could. "I came here as part of the challenge," David said, his own voice thick with emotion, "to understand what ordinary Americans face. I didn't know about this place, about any of you." He paused. "But when I met you, Grace, you showed me something I've forgotten. You reminded me what it means to be human." "So what were we?" Grace's voice broke. "An experiment? A lesson?" "No." David's voice was firm. "You were the truth I've been running from for years." He pulled documents from his jacket, official papers, stamped and signed. "The demolition is canceled. Permanently." He looked at Rose. "The $50,000 loan is forgiven. This property is yours, free and clear. No debt." Rose's hands flew to her mouth. "Furthermore," David continued, addressing the crowd, "Sterling Solutions is establishing a new department dedicated to protecting small businesses from corporate displacement. We'll provide interest-free loans, legal support, and resources to help communities like yours thrive." The crowd murmured in disbelief. Some people started clapping hesitantly. But Grace just stood there, silent, her arms wrapped around herself. David turned to her directly. "Grace, you're working 2 jobs while going to school and taking care of your mother. That stops today. Sterling Solutions will cover your mother's complete cancer treatment. Everything. Medication, surgery, whatever she needs." Grace's tears spilled over. "Your community college tuition is paid through graduation. And I'm offering you a position as director of the Community Protection Initiative. You'll help make sure what almost happened here never happens to anyone else." The crowd erupted. People were crying, hugging, shouting praise. But Grace didn't move. She stared at David, her face a storm of emotions. Gratitude, confusion, anger, hurt. Finally, she spoke. "Why?" "Because you saw me," David said simply. "When I was invisible, you saw me. When I was nothing, you treated me like I was worth something. You didn't do it for a reward. You did it because it was right." His voice cracked. "You taught me that real wealth isn't what you own. It's who you are when nobody's watching." Grace wiped her eyes. "And what happens when the cameras stop?" When everyone goes home, will you still remember us? Or will we just be another story you tell at board meetings? The question hung in the air, sharp and necessary. David met her gaze. I can't promise I'll be perfect. I can't undo years of being disconnected. But I promise this. I'll never forget what you gave me. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve it. Silence stretched between them. Then, slowly, Grace nodded. Not forgiveness. Not yet, but acknowledgement. We'll see, she said quietly. Actions speak louder than money, Mr. Sterling. I know, he replied, and I'm ready to prove it. What nobody knew, what wouldn't be revealed until much later, was that Robert Hayes had orchestrated everything. Robert, David's business partner and oldest friend, had known about the Portland project. He'd seen David's signature on the demolition orders, and he'd specifically chosen Rose's Diner as the place to send David during his challenge. He'd wanted David to really see, the human cost of their corporate decisions. 6 months after that morning in Portland, David finally pieced it together. He confronted Robert during a quiet dinner at Robert's house. You set me up, David said, staring at his friend in disbelief. You knew about Rose's Diner. You knew what we were planning to do there. That's why you sent me to that specific area. Robert didn't deny it. He just smiled slightly. I saved you, David. You would become the kind of man who signs people's lives away without blinking. Someone had to remind you who you used to be. David was silent for a long moment, letting it all sink in. The anger he expected to feel never came. Instead, he felt something else. Gratitude. Thank you, he said finally, raising his glass. Because Robert was right. Without Grace, without that week, without seeing his own cruelty reflected back at him through the eyes of someone who still chose kindness, David would have been lost forever. But the real work had just been beginning. The first month after the confrontation was chaos. David had to face his board of directors, explain why he'd canceled a multi-million-dollar project, convince investors that his new direction wasn't corporate suicide. Some board members resigned. Some investors pulled out. The business media called him unstable, said he was having a breakdown. David didn't care. He worked 18-hour days restructuring Sterling Solutions from the ground up. He personally reviewed every development project, asking questions he'd never asked before. Who lives there? What happens to them? Is there another way? He created the Community First initiative with Grace as its director. She was tough, demanding, refusing to let him take shortcuts or make empty promises. She pushed back in meetings, called him out when he slipped into old patterns, reminded him constantly that real change required real sacrifice. Grace's mother, Mrs. Rebecca Miller, underwent successful treatment at the best cancer center in Oregon. David visited her there once, brought flowers, sat awkwardly by her bedside while Grace was at work. Thank you for what you did for my daughter, Mrs. Miller said, her voice weak but warm. She's the one who saved me. David replied honestly. Mrs. Miller smiled. Grace has always seen the best in people, even when they can't see it themselves. Don't make her regret that. I won't. I promise. Grace herself was thriving. She'd moved her mother into a better apartment, finished her degree at the top of her class, and was proving to be a brilliant advocate for small business owners. She was fierce in negotiations, compassionate with communities, and absolutely refused to compromise her values. She and David maintained a careful professional relationship, respectful but distant. She called him Mr. Sterling. She kept their meetings formal. The wall between them was clear, and David understood why. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. Rose's Diner underwent renovations. New floors, fresh paint, better equipment. But the menu stayed the same. The prices remained affordable. The heart remained unchanged. Rose hired 2 new waitresses and finally took a day off for the first time in 5 years. The construction workers still came for breakfast. The nurses still grabbed coffee after night shifts. The community still gathered there, because some places are more than just buildings. Their home. David visited often, though not as CEO David Sterling in his suits and entourage. He came as just David, dressed simply, eating at the same corner booth, talking with construction workers and students and retirees. One Saturday afternoon, 6 months after everything changed, Grace slid into the booth across from him. She was reviewing case files, making notes in the margins with fierce concentration. David watched her work. This young woman who'd changed his entire life by simply treating him with kindness. "What?" she asked without looking up, sensing his gaze. "I was just thinking," he said softly, "about how close I came to destroying the best thing that ever happened to me." Grace set down her papers. Her expression had softened over the months, though she still kept those careful boundaries. "You know what I learned through all this?" she said. "Real dignity isn't about how much money you have. It's about how you treat the people the world forgets." David nodded slowly. "And real wealth isn't what you own. It's not losing your humanity along the way." Grace studied him for a moment, then smiled. A real smile, genuine and warm. "You're learning, Mr. Sterling. I had a good teacher." Outside, Portland hummed with its usual rhythm. Traffic and voices and life moving forward. But inside Rose's diner, something quieter existed. Something precious. Hope. Community. Second chances. And the understanding that sometimes the richest person in the room is the one who remembers what it's like to have nothing and chooses kindness anyway. 2 years later, David Sterling stood in front of a crowd of 500 business leaders at a conference in Seattle. He'd been invited to speak about Sterling Solutions' remarkable transformation, how the company had shifted from pure profit-driven expansion to community-focused development, and somehow become more successful than ever. But David didn't want to talk about profit margins or market strategies. He wanted to tell them about Grace. "I'm going to tell you about the day I had everything and realized I had nothing," he began. The room fell silent. He told them about the challenge, about living on $500, about being invisible, about a diner and a waitress who chose kindness when she had every reason not to, about discovering that his signature had nearly destroyed the very people who taught him what it meant to be human. "I thought wealth was measured in billions," he said. "But I met a young woman working 2 jobs, caring for her sick mother, going to school at night, and she had something I'd lost years ago. She had her humanity intact. She had compassion. She had dignity." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "Grace Miller taught me that you can have all the money in the world and still be bankrupt in the ways that matter, and you can have almost nothing and be richer than kings." The audience was completely still, hanging on every word. "Real wealth," David continued, "isn't what you own. It's who you become. It's whether you see people when they're invisible, whether you show kindness when nobody's watching, whether you use your power to lift people up or push them down." He looked around the room at faces he recognized. CEOs, executives, people who made decisions that affected millions of lives. Every signature you make, every project you approve, every deal you sign, there are real people behind those numbers. People with families, people with dreams, people who deserve dignity. His voice grew stronger. "Don't make my mistake. Don't wait until you're on the other side of your own cruelty to learn this lesson." The applause started slowly, then built into something powerful. People stood. Some were wiping their eyes. After the speech, dozens of executives approached him. Some wanted advice. Some wanted to share their own stories of losing touch and finding their way back. Some just wanted to shake his hand and say, "Thank you." That evening, David drove back to Portland, not to his mansion in the hills, but to downtown, to Rose's diner. It was Friday night, and the place was packed. Families celebrating birthdays, couples on dates, groups of friends laughing over coffee. The diner had become something of a local legend, a symbol of community resistance and second chances. Rose saw him come in and waved from behind the counter. "Your usual booth is open, honey." David slid into the corner booth and smiled. Grace appeared a moment later, carrying a coffee pot. She wasn't working. She hadn't waited tables in over a year, but she still stopped by the diner regularly. "It was home. Saw your speech online," she said, pouring him coffee without asking. "Pretty good." "You think so?" "Hum." She sat down across from him. "Though you talked about me too much. People are going to think I walk on water or something." David laughed. "You kind of do." Grace rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. The wall between them had come down slowly over 2 years. They'd moved from Mr. Sterling and Ms. Miller to David and Grace. From professional distance to genuine friendship. "How's your mom?" David asked. "Cancer-free for 18 months now." Grace's smile widened. "She's volunteering at the cancer center, helping other families navigate treatment. Says it gives her purpose." "That's wonderful." "Yeah." Grace looked around the diner, her expression softening. "You know what's funny? 2 years ago, I thought my life was over. I thought we were going to lose everything. And now—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "Now I have my dream job. My mom's healthy. I'm actually making a difference. It's weird how life works sometimes." "It's not weird," David said quietly. "You worked for it. You earned it. Not because of what I did, but because of who you are." Grace met his eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "Thank you," she said finally, "for listening that week, for changing, for proving that people can actually learn and grow." She paused. "A lot of rich guys would have just thrown money at the problem and walked away. You didn't do that." "I couldn't," David said, "because you taught me that money without humanity is worthless. That power without compassion is just tyranny." He smiled slightly. "Plus, you would have hunted me down if I'd half-assed it." Grace laughed. "Damn right I would have." They sat there for a while, comfortable in the silence, watching the diner buzz with life around them. Rose bringing out plates of food. Families sharing meals. Strangers becoming friends over coffee and pie. This was what mattered, David thought. Not the mansions or the private jets or the board meetings. This, connection, community, people caring about people. "David," Grace said softly. "Yeah, I forgive you. I just wanted you to know that. It took me a while, but I forgive you." David felt something release in his chest, a weight he'd been carrying for 2 years. "Thank you," he whispered. "That means more than you know." Grace reached across the table and squeezed his hand briefly. "You did the work. You earned it." Outside, Portland carried on in all its messy, beautiful chaos. People rushing home from work. Street musicians playing for change. Life happening in all its complicated glory. But inside Rose's diner, something simple and profound existed. 2 people who'd found each other at exactly the right moment. One who'd forgotten what mattered, and one who'd helped him remember. One who'd had everything but was empty, and one who'd had almost nothing but was full. Together, they'd learned that real wealth has nothing to do with bank accounts. It's measured in kindness shown to strangers, in dignity given freely, in the choice to see people when the world makes them invisible. In the end, we're not remembered for what we owned. We're remembered for how we made people feel, for whether we lifted others up or stepped on them on our way to the top. David Sterling had learned this lesson the hard way, but he'd learned it, and he spent every day trying to live up to the grace that Grace had shown him. Because true wealth isn't what you have. It's who you are when everything else is stripped away. It's the kindness you show when nobody's watching. And it's remembering, always remembering, that every person you meet is carrying a story, fighting a battle, deserving of dignity. That's the lesson. That's what really matters. And that's a kind of wealth that no amount of money can buy.